Terra Formars. I made a video discussing its pretty good first season and terrible second season in regards to its anime adaptation, which you guys should probably watch to fully understand this video. If you don't want to go through with that though, I understand, though making sure I can afford food to keep creating these videos is a nice positive. Basically, all you need to know for now is that Earth wanted to terraform Mars to help the booming population. It's inhabitable 500 years later, but the cockroaches sent along to help Moscow turned into Hulk Hogan, and somehow they've caused an incurable disease to spread on Earth, killing people. In retaliation, a group of Earth's best warriors, that were willing to volunteer, are given the abilities of bugs and sent to Mars so they can collect samples and hopefully find a cure from these mysterious creatures. Some people have conflicted opinions on the manga and first season of the anime, but I think they're both pretty good. The art is nice, characters are fun and memorable, the terraformers are an interesting, unique threat, the powers are cool, and the anime has its own slew of positives completely separate from that of the manga. And Japan definitely agreed with me because, at least for the time the manga was active before going into hiatus, people loved the hell out of it over there. Terraformers Mania was a real thing that you could see if you lived in Japan around the time. The popularity of it never really permeated into American culture like a lot of other manga have been able to do, possibly from the anime's bad censorship when it was being directly broadcast from Japanese TV, but if you know anything about manga, when they get popular enough, Japan has the bright idea to make a live-action adaptation, and you guessed it, Terraformers was given that exact treatment. By now, we probably all know just how bad a live-action adaptation of anime can be when it isn't handled well. Personally speaking, the only ones I can remember unironically enjoying are the Gintama movie and... yeah, that's about it. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. Japan isn't exactly the leading country in terms of movie-making prowess, and while there are many films from Japan I absolutely love like Battle Royale, I've noticed a common theme of those types of movies is that they're mostly done with practical effects. Yeah, if it isn't a full-on animated movie specifically made for showing it off, Japan has kinda had a terrible track record with CGI monstrosities in the past. With stuff like the JoJo live-action movie that I haven't seen, it does appear like they're getting much better at this type of stuff, but in general, yeah, it's pretty shitty. The reason is pretty simple too. Anime or manga-based live-action movies are pretty much the equivalent of a video game movie in the US. They're based off of well-known, liked properties, and most of the time the people adapting them have nothing but money in mind, leaving all integrity to the wayside. Like I said before, there can be exceptions, just like there can be exceptions for video game movies, but it's not often, and you're going to need a talented staff to pull it off. And to this movie's credit, they did get potentially the best guy they could to direct, Takashi Miike. That name might not be familiar to an American viewer, but he's well known in Japan for making two types of movies: theatrical psychological horrors with tons of gore, usually through practical effects, and direct-to-video movies. Some of his films, like Ichi the Killer, which also happened to be an adaptation of a manga, were so gruesome in fact that they were outright banned in multiple countries, like Germany. Germany's a pretty fucked up country, you've seen Felde? My god. And if you know Terraformers, the gore is one of its main appeals, so with a director known for making violent adaptations of manga and direct-to-video movies, you could say Miike was the perfect director for this film. Unfortunately, this project had some problems going way farther back than just a proper vision needed to make everything come to life. Something I didn't mention in my original Terraformers video, or in my plot synopsis, is that the series had a prologue story before its main events. The short lasts 6 chapters and covers the first volume of the manga, being made into an OVA just for better flow in the regular anime series. This is what they decided to base the movie off of, and already we've got some major problems when it's the only source material being used. Logically speaking, in concept, it does sound like the best idea. Terraformers, for the most part, is only like 2 arcs spreading across a super long time span. There's no way you could reasonably release a movie that covers a good portion of that and makes fans happy. You also couldn't make an entirely original story for the series, since it's pretty much one continuous narrative that doesn't have much room for deviation unless non-canon. Therefore, it would make the most sense to cover the first volume because it's short, self-contained, and it's canon. On the other hand, however, 6 chapters for an almost 2-hour-long movie isn't a lot to work with. If we're talking anime movies adapting parts from a manga, time has shown they usually adapt 2 to 3 volumes, since that's about how much you could do in the same amount of time for an anime adaptation. Without even that much to work with, the movie is going to have to take some creative liberties to stretch it out longer. Also, the entire point of the first volume is just sort of to set up maybe 4 or 5 important characters that will be referenced or used in the plot later down the line, so among the 15 crew members for the journey, only 5 get some kind of development and only 2 survive. The first volume also sets up exposition for what the cockroaches are like, the threat they pose to humanity, the general fighting style of the human characters, and so on. I'd really just describe it best as a well thought out setup that's enjoyable and doesn't want to waste your time while building up the main series. Like I said, logically speaking, it might be the most possible to turn into a movie, but with all those factors in play, there's gonna have to be a good amount of changes for people to recognize it as a good, singular experience with memorable characters and a developed story. When it comes to extending the film longer than you'd expect it to be, I didn't really notice too much variation from the original in terms of events, at least up to near the end. But there were some noticeable sections that were both out of place and long-lasting. For one example, in the manga, the crew tries to flee the Terra Formars in an escape vehicle, and they use a guy with a fire-blowing ability to get away, making their escape and ending up in an area where they can find the ship from the crew before them. The guy also dies immediately. In the movie, this same series of events plays out, but the guy lives and the escape pod spends multiple minutes going through a cockroach avalanche. No, you heard me correctly. A cockroach avalanche. Sorry, wait, 2 cockroach avalanches, because 1 was not enough. Several fight scenes are also extended and made longer, which doesn't help the visuals that I'll talk about later, but beyond those extended scenes, there are a few more easy to point out flaws with the story changes. Remember when I said that the crew for the Mars trip consisted of volunteers from around the world? Yep, well, that included tan, black, white, Chinese, and Japanese people all together. But here's a bit you might not know about Japan. They're incredibly homogenous, as in over 98% of the population ethnically is Japanese. Using that demographic chart as reference, it's going to be pretty difficult to fill out a live-action cast that looks like the manga's characters who can act well and speak fluent Japanese. Do you know how many black men there are in Japan born in the country or living there who can fluently speak the language and act? Probably like 6. Total. There are rural cities and villages in Japan where elderly people have never even seen a white person in the flesh because they are so rare. So if that's the case, what's your next best option? Making the entire crew Japanese, of course, but that one change also opens up the floodgates to some of the biggest plot holes of the film. I mean, half of the fun of Terra Formars is seeing how the different foreign bodies back on Earth are calculating what to do next and feuding in their own silent sort of war. The first volume is no different in that regard, though being shown on a smaller scale than all the world leaders being together, only really having 2 characters, Dr. Honda of the Japanese team and Commander Newton of the Roman Empire. In the manga, the 2, as opposing forces working together, obviously have different views on what should be done on Mars and with the terraformers. Honda wants to keep the team from combat when possible and bring back a terraformer egg to create an army of cockroaches to fight for Japan and keep them safe, obviously in secret. On the other hand, Newton wants the crew to engage the cockroaches in combat to get data and destroy any eggs so the terraformers can't cause problems on Earth. The 2 then engage in a mental battle of sorts using the cast, and hijinks ensue. With an only Japanese cast now, however, the whole conflict can't really, well, exist, at least not in its current form. No different countries means no Commander Newton, means no one to face Honda and his plans, so how do you create conflict? Turn Honda into more of a villain, I guess. Now he's gone from a curious scientist to an eccentric one with comedic undertones who cares a lot about fashion. He also already knows of the compatibility of the terraformers and wants to have the crew fight so he can get data alongside the terraformer egg. I should also remind you though that the only reason bringing the egg back was kept a secret is because it was specifically for Japan's benefit when the crew was made up of people from around the world trying to accomplish a separate task. In this movie, however, it's all Japanese citizens working for the Japanese government on a mission exclusively for the Japanese. Why doesn't he just tell them all that they're looking for an egg and might have to fight along the way to get it? Wouldn't that make them more prepared for combat overall in the story? There's a reason Honda wanted little conflict in the manga, and that's because the crew wasn't really trained to face them and he didn't want his objective to be in vain from miscalculating the cockroach's strength. Here, he just abandons the fighters he didn't tell about the egg catching after they fight the roaches, and it doesn't make any sense. The movie even follows the same idea of one of the undercover operatives shooting the main commander, but like, Why do that? Especially in this movie, he was actually told about the eggs for whatever reason, something he wasn't told about in the manga, yet he still killed anyway? All these deaths and betrayals are completely unnecessary when just telling the whole crew about what their true objective is and how to prepare would save so much time and effort. None of this makes any logical sense because you've tampered with one of the key aspects of the story to where it can't work that well if you keep the same basic plot elements. And in turn, it makes characters like Honda just seem so much more stupid than they actually are. Though to be fair, it's not like he's the only character that's off worse in this. Now, like I said, most of the crew didn't get much development in the 6 chapters at most they had in the spotlight, but that was by design. Most of the crew was just there to show off some of the effects the bugs procedure gave them. It also foreshadows how the Terra Formars can later use those same abilities on their own soldiers for when the next crew shows up 20 years later. You weren't supposed to get too attached to almost any of the cast beyond Ichiro, Shokichi, Theon, and Captain Davis because that wasn't the purpose the author had in mind. Since this movie is longer than it really needs to be though, it tries to give extra depth to characters but can't do it well. Like there's this whole scene where it's like, oh, why did they hire all of us? An ex-cop, a trafficking ringleader, a serial killer, a jock, a nerd, a basket case, a safecracker, an in guy, blah blah blah. I don't really get why the movie decided that information was so necessary that we needed a scene explaining who each of them are, because even in the movie, as the Terra Formars show up, characters who barely had a line of dialogue start getting killed en masse, making you wonder why learning anything about them was worth stopping the movie over in the first place. The film even brings its members down from 15 to 10 in order to, I guess, flesh them out more, but that never really happens. It's not like these new characters they've created don't have potential either. They added some characters that could be worth exploring, like 2 ex-Yakuza and some insane serial killer, but all that's really done with them is the Yakuza saying how cool Yakuza are before being shot down, and the serial killer getting mad 2 girls he wanted to sleep with were killed before he could do so. And with the serial killer especially, I think there could have been so much more done with him to fix some of the plot holes I mentioned. Wouldn't it make more sense in the story that one of these insane crew members would go rogue and start formulating a plan to kill everyone and take the money the other person would have gotten for themselves or something like that, instead of Dr. Honda just having people killed for no goddamn reason? And I mean, yeah, there is that one girl from the manga who wants to rule over the cockroaches with her ability back on Earth, but that doesn't really have that much of an effect on the actual story whatsoever, and in fact, it's pretty much dismissed almost immediately like it is in the manga, so I'm pretty sure a serial killer trying to kill everyone would be a lot more impactful and interesting. Why the hell would you have a serial killer character in your movie that gets superpowers if he wasn't going to try and kill at least one person? I know I'm asking for a reasonable answer in a movie about people going to fight giant cockroaches on Mars with bug powers, but come the fuck on! Is it so difficult to give characters traits and then have them act based on those traits? Do you people just not know what basic character writing is? I mean, some of the characters are handled much better than others, like the main characters who mostly just act like they did in the manga, but if you're going to change characters and try to expand on them, at least expand from the basic archetypes you set up, you ignorant sons of bitches! Anyway, with that rant about badly written characters out of the way, how about we move on to the real main attraction of this video? You know what I'm talking about. The visuals. If you saw my last video on Terra Formars talking about the abysmal second season it had, you might know I don't particularly care for the animation or general aesthetic. Everything was too bright, the characters looked out of place and cheap compared to their first season counterparts, and the Terra Formars themselves looked rather bad, making all the fight scenes hard to watch because they weren't really even bad in a funny way, just bad in a way that made me want to cry. With that in mind, this movie kind of set me up for something different in the beginning. The first 15 minutes, I'd say, actually look pretty decent. It has ambient lighting for this sort of downtrodden slump set sometime in the future. The chase scene that ensues has some nice practical effects I appreciated, and decent looking CG. Overall, at the time having never watched the movie, it looked like it was shaping up to look decent. Something that most live action movies aren't able to pull off. The sets looked alright, costumes seemed faithful, it looked like it had a budget, and then I saw the Terra Formars. Yeah, these are some of the goofiest versions of the Terra Formars I've ever seen for a myriad of reasons. First, the CG is not very good. You know, from a still image, you might be fooled into thinking these do actually look alright, but as soon as they start to move, you can just feel how cheap they are. It's like dancing puppets. They have no restriction on how outlandish their movements can look, and it's almost doll-like how easily they swing their arms around like they're cartoon characters. The overly rendered models aren't helping them look better either. In large hordes of them particularly, it becomes way more obvious how much this this doesn't work for actually being serious. Need I bring up the cockroach tsunami again? Because that was just so fucking amazing, I feel the need to bring it up again. This movie renders the characters on a rather badly animated road buggy piercing a tidal wave of cockroaches in a mess of CG Shark Boy and Lava Girl which they could pull off. The visuals in relation to the cockroaches is pure comedy, yet the film tries to portray them as an actual threatening force, only making the comedy really ring out to me even further. Like, really? You want me to genuinely be scared by this face with those movements in that animation? Bro, you need to get real, that's not happening. And one aspect I think contributed more than anything to me feeling marginally less intimidated by these walking punchlines in comparison to the original Terra Formars is their eyes. In the film, they try to give the Terra Formars these more insect-like black eyes, I guess thinking that would make them seem more unsettling than the original. But what the filmmakers and general character designers for this movie seem to fail to see is what makes the original design so frightening is all its near-human features. We can tell it's obviously not the same species as us, and there are some key features indicating that, but among the small details adding to its creepy demeanor, the fact it's got a face with eyes that move like a human's is probably the scariest for one reason. It indicates that the roach has thought. These monstrous abominations with incredible speed, strength, and numbers also have the ability to not only kill us in droves, but perceive what's going on around them using their dead, vacant eye sockets and facial expressions to help indicate how they're feeling. And that's a scary thought because it shows how much closer they're getting to us on an evolutionary scale. Making the eyes blacked out and less expressive just takes away from their creepiness factor immensely, and when you compare it to how the anime and manga use the eyes and general facial expressions effectively, it's much easier to see why it doesn't work. Of course, I could also bring up the easier to point out fact that their movements in comparison to the other iterations of the Terra Formars are not only more goofy, but also slower and less menacingly acute, but I don't know, talking about eyes is fun. They can really give or take away a lot from a character. Don't think the shitty visuals are confined to the CG roaches either, though. No. We've got the perfect cacophony of ass for the human characters as well, thanks to the makeup team behind each of the crew's different transformations. Looking at the manga, the best way I can describe how the characters look after transforming into their bug-infused selves with potential for additional body parts is elegant. There isn't an excessive amount of detail behind any of the transformations to make them too out there for you to take the story seriously, but they give connections between the character and animal they sort of fused with, so it's easy to identify. Move over to the designs for the live-action movie and dear God, what have they done? What happened to the simplicity? Why do all the characters have full face makeup to change the color of their skin? Why do their prosthetics look so cheap and plasticky? Why do they have so much hair? This sorry bastard here has a full Marge Simpson hairdo. What is the purpose of overcomplicating something that doesn't need to be complicated? Literally, you are just creating more work for the staff that they shouldn't have to do in the first place. You can even see that the less complicated costumes without as much makeup or hair or whatever look much better because simplicity is key in a live-action setting. And I know I don't need to get into the people that got CG as part of their costumes. What a fucking joke, my God. I mean, it's hilarious, but in terms of like an actually serious movie with stakes and fear, this is a mess of biblical proportions. And you know, there is one section where I would have gladly welcomed some more messiness than we got, and what else would it be besides the gore? How many times do I gotta teach you this lesson, old executive men? The gore of Terra Formars is one of its most fun, unique attributes, and whether it's season 2 or now this, you have once again missed the mark so hard you've shot an audience member with an arrow. The gore in this movie is so incredibly censored and downplayed throughout the whole thing, and I have no idea why. Remember, the director is Takashi Miike, a guy that's made movies with scenes so violent I probably couldn't even show them on YouTube. He's a brutal guy that likes to put horrific, shocking stuff into whatever he makes, so why does this look like it was going for a PG-13 rating? The source material gives plenty of options for kills that would be right up Miike's alley of gruesome, dismemberment, being blasted to smithereens, tons of other shit that would probably get me age restricted like last time if I don't censor it, but how does almost everyone die in this movie? Either they lose their heads, and as the head rolls it looks more like a cheap Halloween prop than an actual person's skull, or they get stabbed in the chest, usually by a Terra Formar hand. There are only one or two other deaths that are a bit more creative, like the Yakuza getting shot down in a way that still doesn't even look like it really hurts that much, but for the most part, the two scenarios I brought up are the main arbiters of death in the movie. What's worse, when people get hand stabbed, they don't even spill blood from their wounds. They've all got fucking bug juice coming out of them. Like, damn, I didn't know the procedure actually turned all their organs into those of bugs, along with turning their blood to the consistency of instant jello left in the sun for a little too long. Science sure is amazing. There's no potential option that Miike might have been censored heavily and kept from showing his true creative vision, since that wouldn't be as marketable, even though, and I don't know how many times I gotta repeat this, the gore is one of Terra Formars' most recognizable traits. Even in silhouette, he can barely portray anything beyond some obvious CG blood splatters over shadows of people getting punched or dogpiled like some sort of fucking pro wrestling move. Probably just to cover for the terrible long action scenes where almost no blood is shed, and for the climax of the film, they literally had to pull a deus ex machina of a dead character coming back to life so they could get rid of all the cockroaches by the end. And still, they were barely able to show any true carnage in a fucking massive explosion. And yes, this is indeed a film original concept. I mean, what's next? Are Terra Formars gonna go from leaking bug guts when they die to coughing up milk or something? Why, yes. Yes, they are. But yeah, in the end of all this, it's clear this whole project has some problems. Because of the limitations from filming a movie in Japan where they couldn't get a diverse cast, they had to complicate the story to a point that the actions of characters don't make any sense. Despite bringing down the number of cast members to potentially give them some more personality you could hold on to, most die without having these new characteristics explored, just making the audience want more. The Terra Formars aren't nearly as menacing as they were in the manga or anime, and that carries over to how the bug transformations look on the characters. And of course, the gore is severely turned down and laughably bad. I say all this to let you know one thing. Watch this movie. It's so incredibly stupid, so bad, so low budget, but I can't lie and say I wasn't entertained the entire way through. This thing, for better or for worse, kept my attention the entire length of its runtime with its stupidity, and I would absolutely recommend watching it, especially if you've seen the original series for reference. If you want to have an actually faithful retelling of the first volume of the story, you're not gonna find that here. Just check out the 2-episode OVA that's much closer to the original version. But if you want to just have a good time, there are far worse things you could be watching. Hope you guys enjoyed seeing me tear into this amazingly bad adaptation, and I hope to see you all in the next video. I've been Just Stop. See you later.